Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me? All right, and can everyone see me? Great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Emily with National Geographic Learning, and I'm so pleased to welcome you all today to the webinar Exploring Global Topics from Multiple Perspectives in Teenagers Classes with Dan Barber. Great. So before we get started, I do just have a few quick housekeeping notes to mention to make sure you have a great webinar experience. First off, we do always recommend joining from a strong internet connection. No, it's not always possible, but it does prevent some connectivity issues that some people experience. If for any reason you do get disconnected, please just rejoin the webinar through the link that was sent to you in the email originally. Next up, we will be sending along a recording of the slides, a recording of the session, the slides, as well as a certificate of attendance to everyone in this webinar if you do miss anything. So just stay tuned for that, and we will send that in a few business days. And now I'm pleased to introduce Dan Barber. Dan Barber is a teacher, trainer, and writer based in Cadiz, Spain. He's taught classes of all types and ages over more than 20 years, as well as tutoring and directing Trinity TESOL courses and managing his own school. He is an author for National Geographic Learning Perspective series and is a co-author for Look, National Geographic Learning's new primary series. His interests include motivation and learning, coaching approaches to teaching English, and the science of learning in the brain. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Dan.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me, first of all? Yes. That's a great sign. What a relief. It's always good when the technical side of things works from the word go. Brilliant. If you can't hear me, then it's a problem with your audio, I'm sure, because everyone else can. Very warm welcome to you all from a rather cloudy Spain, which is where I'm based. You know that the word global is in the title of this talk, so very quickly just write down the city or country where you are watching this from, and also type in PJ if you happen to be wearing your pajamas. Someone's wearing pajamas. Thank you, Alexandria. Oh, lots of pajamas. PJ-ish. Thank you, Rohan. Albania, Peru, Germany, Belgium, Bucharest. Hermonso, I've been there. Romania, I've been there too. Lots of people from Romania. Nice to see you all. Great stuff. Ukraine, Turkey, Iran, Quito in Ecuador. That's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. A warm welcome to you, as I say. Thank you very much for coming. I don't know what time it is where you are, but it could be any time of the day in a webinar of this type. I'd like to thank National Geographic Learning as well for inviting me to come and talk this evening. Just a couple of things. Does my button work? No, let me just click on that. There we go. On the title page there, you'll see a link at the bottom and a QR code. So if you've got a QR reader, you can just punch that in to your computer or your mobile, and it'll take you to a Padlet that I've set up, which is like a notice board with lots of bookmarks for the internet, and that contains all of the links and websites and people that I mention in this talk. So that's a good resource for further reading if you're interested in any of the issues that come up this evening. Another thing to say is that I will try and make sure there are a few minutes for questions at the end. So try and think of questions as you are listening and watching, and you can ask them at the end. Okay, right. Well, let's get started. I'm going to start with a quiz. And to see how much you know about food. So how much of a foodie are you? Okay, I'm going to give you 6 questions, and each question you'll have about 10 or 15 seconds to think about and answer, and you can answer in the chat box like you've been doing so far. give your answer. If it's a guess, you can say I don't know, or you can guess, or you can say I'm sure. It doesn't matter. Let's start off with question number 1. I hope you're ready. Here we go. So question number 1 is about the tongue. How many different specialized areas for different tastes are there on your tongue? So we're thinking about things like salty, sweet, things like that. Okay, the answers are coming in now. 4, 5, 6, 5, 4, 6, lots of different answers, but all between 4 and 6 so far. 40, Rohan says. 7 from Katerina. Okay, lovely. I'll give you the answers in a few minutes. Let's go to question number 2. So question number 2, what percentage of the food that humans produce is wasted? Okay, and you've got some options there. A lot of people saying 75, 55, 25, a whole mixture of range there. Okay, so let's carry on to question number 3 now. Question 3, what do 80% of people worldwide regularly eat as a rich source of protein that people in the West, I'm talking about Europe and America mostly, do not eat? So what could that be? Rice, insects, bugs, soy, beans, algae. Interesting, Uma. Snails. Oh, we eat snails in Spain. I'm not very keen on them. Okay, let's move on to question number 4. Question number 4. What will all of the plastic in the oceans outweigh by 2050? So outweigh here means to be heavier than. So what do you think will be plastics will outweigh in the oceans? More than the moon? I hope not, Natasha. Some honest people there, Karina, no idea. All the fish and sea creatures, says Claire. Heavier than Australia. I don't know, how much does Australia weigh? That's a very good question. Emerged islands, 1,000,000 tons. Too much, says, who said too much? Larissa. Yes, I agree. Tough one. Okay, let's move on to question number 5. So this is about the packaging in food. Why do the 6 big drinks companies only use a small percentage of recycled plastic in their bottles? So what do you think their reason is for not using more recycled plastic? So Elisabetta, it's not to respect the environment, presumably would mean to use recycled plastic, but they're not using it. A lot of people saying it's too expensive, it's to do with money. Okay, very good. And let's move on to our final question. Question number 6. Which species, which animal, essential for modern agriculture, is under dire threat or serious threat from agriculture? And why? Oh, lots of correct answers straight away. Bees, 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 bees. Mice. I'd like to know how mice are important for agriculture. Lots of people saying bees. Anyone know why? No fertilization. Right. Pollination. Luis has got the word, hit the word on the head there. And why is it a problem? Florina's talking about pollution. Yes, they pollinate. That's the reason they're important. Uma says pesticides. Chemicals. Okay. Let's finish there now, and let's go through the answers. So let's look at question number 1, which was about the tongue, and a lot of you said 4, 5, or 6 areas of the tongue. Let's pull up the photograph. Does anybody remember doing this and learning this when you were at school? I do. I remember the lesson very clearly. Yes, a lot of people. Long ago, Carmen. Me too. Longer than I care to mention. Yes, and do you remember doing the experiment in class? Do you remember putting salt on different parts of your tongue, sugar, and drinking, squeezing lemon juice onto your tongue? Some people say yes. Not really. Okay. I don't know how about you, but I wasn't terribly convinced. It didn't feel particularly convincing that one part was tasting the salt more than any other. And that's in fact because the real answer is 0. There are no specialized areas on the tongue for taste. All of your taste buds can taste all of the different tastes. This is known as the tongue map, and it's a common misconception, and it's clear from your responses that this is something that we've been teaching in schools for many years, and we've been teaching all around the world, but it's not true. And it was actually disproved as long ago as 1901. There was some research to suggest that there were areas that might be more sensitive or not, but it was very inconclusive, and it was in German. And then the translator, whoever translated it into German or out of German, sort of misunderstood and then drew a handy diagram, having misunderstood the information, and that sort of stuck. Carmen says, that's a relief. I thought my tongue was not good enough. I quite agree, Carmen. All this time you've been diligently chewing on one side of your face salty food and sugary food on the other side of your face, and now you've realized that that was a waste of time. So why does that carry on? Well, we'll talk about that in a little while. Why do these myths persevere in courses and course books? I guess one possible explanation would be that people like having discrete classifications for things. It's a nice handy piece of information or misinformation that's very easy to see and to remember, and it's a lot more satisfying to think of it as being all discrete areas of the tongue rather than a sort of much more complicated one. In fact, the areas of the taste are all up here. So your tongue sends the information to your brain, and your brain is the part of your body that sorts out the difference. Lucia, that's why I was never taught this. No, exactly. Your teachers were much cleverer than mine. Okay. Next question was about food waste. A lot of people got this one right. It is, in fact, 55%. According to my sources, and I think there's a lot of scope here for critical thinking, which we'll be talking about in detail later on. This comes from the very beginning of the process at the farm itself. So there's a lot of wasted crops because weeds are infested in the fields. Food isn't stored properly, refrigeration doesn't happen, transport damage in transportation. So a lot of food is wasted all the way through that process. And then of course there's a lot of food wasted in retail, in shops and supermarkets. And then of course there's the domestic food waste, throwing the food into the bin as well. One thing I would say is that this figure of 55 assumes that raising cattle and livestock is a very wasteful way of using the crops and the food that we grow, because so much of what they eat isn't converted into meat. A lot of what they consume is used by their own body for heat, and a lot of it is evacuated at the end of the process, if you know what I mean. So you could argue that that's perhaps a slightly distorted or exaggerated figure. And another thing to think about here is who is wasting so much food? Is it rich, developed countries? I would imagine that the amount of food wasted in developing countries is a lot lower. Who knows? Okay, next one. So a lot of people got this one right. The protein source that a lot of the world uses, but a lot of people feel a little bit icky about it, is, yes, insects. Yummy. A delicious treat there for everyone. Can I just ask, if you've eaten insects, what have you eaten, or what do you eat on a regular basis? That'd be interesting. Crickets are delicious, says Fabiola. Fabiola, where are you? In Mexico, somewhere like that? Looking for Fabiola. Disgusting, says Manuela. Yes, Mexico. Yes, I had crickets in Mexico. Delicious, very nice. Anyone else? By accident? Well, in fact, Carmen, a lot of people eat. In fact, we've all eaten insects all the time. If you ever eat tomato soup, a lot of the tomatoes that don't look nice enough for the supermarket because they contain some insect matter is processed into soup and other products that we use. So everyone eats insects without knowing it. Well, Karina, you don't eat bugs in Argentina, not yet. Well, not yet. Maybe that's the key. There's a lot of interest in the idea of substituting a lot of these inefficient sources of protein, such as beef and pork and chicken, and using insects instead, because insects are a much more efficient converter of food into protein for human consumption. This is a problem to do with overpopulation. Our burgeoning population needs protein, and where are we going to get it from in a sustainable way? And some people suggest that insects may be the answer. Lots of interesting information which I'm missing here. Ants popular in Mexico. I never had ants. And bugs in the Peruvian jungle. Not used at all in Albania. Okay. Vegetable protein is okay. You're quite right, Luth. Obviously, vegetarians seem to survive without animal products, and so do vegans. So that could be true. All right, we're on to my least favourite fact now. This is number 4, and some of you came up with the correct answer, which is that yes. This is not. I did a lot of research into this. I wanted to make absolutely sure that this was true. This is a report by the World Economic Forum, and it was published in January 2016. And it said that if we continue to produce and throw away single-use plastics in the way that we're doing, that by 2050, the total amount of plastic in the oceans will outweigh all of the fish in the oceans. Sobering thought. This is a double whammy because, of course, plastic use is going up, but also fish stocks are going down as we overfish, and so those two facts are combining to create this rather frightening idea that, in fact, there will be more plastic than fish in the oceans. Scary. Okay, let's move on before we all commit suicide and depression. Last one, penultimate one. 6 drinks companies, only 7%. It wasn't because of cost. It was because we like to see our drinks. Recycled plastic can't be transparent. It ends up being white, and then you can colour it any colour you like, but you can't have it transparent. And the marketing suggests to these companies that we want to see our drink before we drink it. We want clear bottles. That's the reason that we're not recycling our plastic. Glass is a possibility, isn't it, Katerina? But this seems like a very simple problem to overcome. We just need to tell these companies that actually we're perfectly happy to drink our Coca-Cola through a white or a black or a red bottle. There are coloured bottles down there. Maybe what we need to do is start buying bottles that are coloured because they are using recycled plastic. That would be a message to the people that matter in this. Okay. Almost 100% of you got the last question right. Yes. Bees are essential for agriculture, and yet they're under threat. And some of you mentioned some of the reasons. The pesticides that we've been using, the artificial fertilizers, also just the expanse of monoculture. Monoculture is that these huge, great big expanses of agriculture of land being used for one single crop, like wheat, for example, or soya, or whatever it happens to be. They're like deserts to insects. Bees are worth billions of dollars to the agricultural, to humans for what they do for us. But we are in serious danger of losing our prime pollinator. So yes, Dana's mentions there's a lot of beekeepers in Romania, and we need to be encouraging beekeeping, but more importantly, the bees need somewhere to feed. They need the flowers, they need the pollen, they need the mixed crops, and they need a cleaner environment in order for them to continue and thrive. So anyway, I'm sorry if that was a rather depressing start to the talk, but I'm hoping that it will raise a few of the issues that I'm now going to talk about. So let's get down to business. This topic is, this webinar is called Exploring Global Topics from Multiple Perspectives. So I want to talk first of all about, to define my terms. Global. Global for me has two distinct meanings in this context. First of all, the global and the idea of including everything. And here I'm thinking about our classrooms, our syllabus content, our materials. Food is one of these global topics, and I chose food because it's a very popular topic in the classroom. Every course book has a unit on food. It often is accompanied by some grammar, such as countable and uncountable nouns, but it's always something that students have got lots to talk about, plenty to learn. Other global topics that we have in our course books include travel, transport, sport, work, the environment, education. These are all the sorts of typical topics that you get if you look at a contents page of any course book, and if you look at sort of exam vocabulary lists and things like that. So global from that point of view is about, I'm going to be talking about the materials and the content that we include in our lessons, and thinking about that. And then multiple perspectives is this idea of coming at these topics from different perspectives, different angles. And I'm going to talk about now a little rationale about why I think that's important in our classes. The global has a second meaning, and that is the idea of globalization. And in a broad sense, that means that what I do, the decisions I make on a personal level, whether I buy that bottle of Coca-Cola or I bring a bottle of water with me when I come out, have potentially global ramifications. My actions have an effect on people in other countries and on the environment. So I see those as political consequences. And I think that that's something that's really important in our classrooms, because I think that our role, if we are to help students survive and thrive and become global citizens, as well as teaching English, then we need to help them become more aware of the consequences of the decisions that they make and responsible for their part in the issues facing our species. Okay. So let's global topics first of all. Okay, the next topic, teacher's role helps students see the bigger picture. That's another way of looking at it. Okay, my next rationale is about seeing how English is used in disseminating all of this information. A lot of scientific research is published in English, possibly most of it. A lot of the sources that are available online and in course books are published in English, and I think it's motivating, or potentially motivating, for students to be meeting this information from these first-hand sources, entering into that English-speaking lingua franca world that we can live in if we have the tools, if we have the English to do that. So I'm hoping that that's a motivating that's going to motivate students to learn English better, by seeing that by doing so that they can access this information much more and see that they are part of this bigger community. The world is changing extremely rapidly, and I think it's important that we then keep our coursebook up to date with fresh perspectives on these old topics. One of the one of the things I notice when I'm teaching, speaking to my students, is how tired they are of the curriculum. I remember bumping into a student of mine, Javi, in the corridor one day in the school, and I said, "Oh, hi, Javi, how are you doing?" We had a chat, and I said, "What are you studying at the moment?" He said, "Well, it's November. We're doing the past simple and past continuous." And it was this inevitability that here we go again, every year the same cyclical curriculum, the same topics coming up time and time again. And I think that we're in serious danger of boring our students if we don't inject some fresh, exciting and engaging angles on these important topics. Hold on. I also think that something I've been very aware of is that there's this myth that we are somehow living in a post-truth world now. And that's not true, is it? We're not living in a post-truth world. The truth is still there for us to explore and discover. But people are deliberately obfuscating, deliberately clouding the issues for their own political and economic ends. And I think that we, as teachers, need to fight that battle with our students to help them to become more aware of the real, the truths behind the lies. One of the great things is it's possible to find these things out in the way that I found out the information for the quiz that we did at the beginning of this talk. It's possible for our students and ourselves to look into these things and to research them. It's all at our fingertips, but there are a lot of pitfalls and dangers in that sort of research, and we're going to spend a lot of the rest of the talk discussing these problems and how we get around them. Post-truth, let me give you a good example, a very personal example to me. Back in January, my daughter decided to go vegan, and whilst we respect her decision and we want to support her in that, and I totally agree with the spirit behind with which she made that decision to stop eating meat and dairy, it's a challenge. It's difficult for us as a family to get our head around, but we're doing our best. And early on in her vegan days, back in January, she came up with a meme that she found on Instagram. She follows Instagram, and I'm going to let you read it now. And when she showed it to me, I said, "Wow, that's incredible." And what I meant was, I find that very hard to believe. I'll show it to you now, and let me see what you think of it. So this is what she saw. Okay, so this is a vegan website, veganstreet.com, and it says, "Do you really need meat to get protein?" And obviously there are millions of vegans, which prove that it is absolutely possible to get the protein you need from meat. But also what it was saying was some data about certain meat food types. This idea that broccoli is some kind of superfood and contains more protein, or as much protein, more protein than beef. And the reason I said it's incredible was because it went against everything I'd learned at school. I thought, well, I find that very hard to believe, but I didn't say anything. I said, "Wow, that's amazing." I asked her for a link and she sent it to me, and then I looked into it and I found out that it's not true. You don't need meat to get protein. That's not the bit that's not true. You can find protein in other sources. However, this information about broccoli was just not true. Here's another meme which shows the actual scientific truth, which was researched by somebody who looked into this, and this is what they came up with. So one of the problems with the original one is that it wasn't comparing like for like. seemed to suggest that that small piece of broccoli, the same size as a piece of steak, had more protein in it and had the same number of calories. In fact, if you want to get 100 calories from broccoli, you have to eat a whole head of broccoli, pretty much, a huge, great big chunk, to get the same number of calories as the beef. Then when you look at the protein consumption, you'll see that in fact, despite the broccoli being a lot bigger than the beef, it still has less protein. It does have protein, but you just need to eat a lot of it. And I would imagine that it has a limited number of amino acids, and you'd need to eat other kinds of vegetables in order to get all of the amino acids that you need. So there we go. That's an example that was very personal to me and one that mattered. I talked to Rosie about it afterwards, and we discussed it. And she was happy to accept a different take on things. I don't want to give the opinion, please, that I don't believe in vegetarianism or veganism. I think it's a very laudable thing, and I'm largely vegetarian myself. However, I wanted to pick apart the details. I discovered actually that this comes from this data is a distorted version of something that came from a book by a Dr. Joel Fuhrman. There's a link in that Padlet if you're interested in following this up further. He wrote a book called Eat to Live, and he's a big proponent of eating lots and lots of vegetables, lots of greens. And he obviously has and he distorts the truth in his book, and then it's further exaggerated by this sort of oversimplified meme. So we are living in a post-truth world in the sense that there's a lot of untruths out there, but there are truths behind it, and we can find those out. And what I used was a bit of critical thinking, didn't I? Something that if you study, you need to learn, and as you grow up as an adult, hopefully you hone your critical thinking skills. It's something that needs to start as young as primary. We can't uncritically accept information. We need to examine it. But it's not just these insta-facts. Go back to the tongue map. The tongue map we've discovered isn't true, and yet that is somehow fossilized in course books and in science curricula all the way through, and it's still going on now. There's my son's science book has this in. Michael Young is a writer about school curricula. He wrote a book called The Curriculum of the Future, and he said he describes school science as a body of knowledge enshrined in textbooks. Enshrined, this idea that somehow the body of knowledge is sacred, we cannot change it. This is a shrine to the knowledge, to the scientific knowledge. And there's a lot of inertia because course books are written to support exams and exam boards. Exam boards accentuate those myths, and they keep going on. I think that most of it's solid stuff, but we need to be critical even there. The tongue map, I would say, is a very innocent mistake to make. I don't think I have wasted too much time trying to taste salt on one side of my mouth and sugar on the other. It hasn't been a problem for me over the years, and I'm sure the same is for you. But think about this diagram. This diagram is a very important one that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Just say yes if you're familiar with the idea of the food pyramid. Yes, and that's multinational again. That's it's not local to my British education. That's everyone since kindergarten. Absolutely, Carolina. Well, now think about how this food pyramid is being challenged. Notice the number of carbs at the bottom of the pyramid. The idea is that we're supposed to eat lots and lots of carbohydrates, and we're not supposed to eat too many vegetables. Fat is very bad. Notice how simplified it is. We know that there are differences between good and bad fats. Avocado is a very fatty food, but it's really good for you. It's been shown that fatty diets can actually help you lose weight, and that sugar is the culprit. Where is sugar in that pyramid? Sugar's right down there at the bottom. We should be carbohydrates need to go up a level or two, don't they? And the vegetables and fruit need to come down, and possibly even fats and chicken and meat. In fact, the pyramid is probably the wrong way to look at it because it's too simple. So it's changing rapidly. How long will it be before the food pyramid disappears from our curricula? So I'd like to, having raised a lot of these issues, I now want us to think about the practicalities of the classroom. Okay, this is a question for you. I wish my students were more aware of, I wish I was more aware of, what issues matter to you, what issues matter to them or should matter to them, do you think? And then there are more technical questions about the classroom. Well, how accessible is the language to talk about these issues? You might want to talk about bees and pollination and pesticides, but there's a lot of technical language there which is perhaps above your students' level. And then the next question is, where can I find resources to adapt for the classroom? How can I source this and present it to the class? So a few people have started writing things. Social problems, yes. Can we be more specific? Social services, interesting. Healthy ways of life, the internet, yes. And lots of big topics there. Okay, I'm going to go back to food now, and I'm going to give you a list that I brainstormed of issues surrounding food. Which of these issues would you, and they're here, which of these issues do you think your students could be more aware of, would be important for them to learn, might be interesting in the classroom? Just have a look at that list. Are there any there that strike you as particularly important for your teenage students? Water management. Manuela said eating disorders, yes, and self-image disorders, absolutely. Food waste, cookery, genetic modification, GM foods, obesity, very important. There was a report that came out in 1 in 25 children in Britain are extremely obese, like medically very, I can't remember the wording that they used. Drug abuse, packaging in plastics, which we've already talked about, absolutely. So there we go. We've got lots of possible angles. Notice these are the multiple perspectives that I'm talking about in the title. We can attack the topic of food from all of these very fresh angles, a lot of which I don't think we have really been talking about in our classes up until now, but I think perhaps we should be. All right. So I'm going to answer two questions now, which have come from the chat. The first one is, what might a lesson that deals with some of these issues look like in the classroom? And how can we broach that problem of language difficulties? That's one question. So what does it look like in the classroom? And then after that, we're going to tackle that issue of critical thinking. Okay, so how can we help our students to think more critically about the information that they're being given? Okay, so let's look at here. We've got a very graphic, visual way of presenting information about the bees and the problem with the bees that we've been discussing. It's an infographic, and it shows very clearly which items of food you would still have if the bees disappeared. So the bottom half of every dish is with bees, and if bees weren't here to pollinate our food, what would we be eating? So you can see, for example, the blackberry pie in the middle. It would have pastry, because wheat isn't pollinated by bees, but the blueberries would all, or the blackberries would all be gone. Not so tasty. No avocados, no salsa, no pasta salad. The Greek salad is reduced to just some cheese. This comes from the Perspectives Pre-Intermediate. I think Emily's going to talk to you about the books that I've been involved in writing. at the end. But here we've got a nice accessible way in. We can personalize it. We can ask students which of these foods do they enjoy. And then, of course, we can hit them with the fact that they may not be able to enjoy it for much longer unless we change things. And the Greek and the infographic help gives us a very clear picture of what the issue is and how it affects us personally. Teenagers love infographics, says Catherine. I'm sure, I imagine they do, like we all do. They're very eye-catching, that's the idea. But again, we need to be careful, don't we? Because a lot of infographics are extremely oversimplified. Food pyramid is an infographic, and we've already criticised that, haven't we? So the point I'm trying to make here is it's visual. And it's also very much related to their lives. So that's the question for you, is how can I bridge this dry academic topic such as packaging and bring it into their lives? Actually, most of these things around food certainly are very easy to find an angle which affects them personally. Okay, let's look at another piece of material that could be used in a lesson. Each of the units in the Perspectives series for teenagers include a TED Talk. I imagine that most of you have either watched one TED Talk or some of you have binged on TED Talks at some point in the last few years. You may know this one. It's quite a famous one by a guy called Tristram Stewart, and it's his life mission to inform the world about food waste. So here's a page. You'll see in the middle there's a viewing, a comprehension activity, which is represented with the pie chart. I'm just going to bring that up now. So the task that I'd like you to do, and you're going to watch the video in a second, and you don't need to tell me the answers. I'm not interested. I'm sure you'll get it right. It's not very difficult. But it's a simple viewing comprehension task, which asks you to think about why the food is wasted. So you'll see on the left that a lot of the food, but not quite half of it, is eaten. That's the good bit. But what about all those bits on the right? What proportion is lost before it leaves the farm, lost because animals aren't efficient, and thrown away? Okay, so Emily, if you'd like to bring the video
So I want you to imagine that these 9 biscuits that I found in the bin represent the global food supply. Okay? We start out with 9. That's what's in fields around the world every single year. The first biscuit we're going to lose before we even leave the farm. That's a problem primarily associated with developing world agriculture, where there is a lack of infrastructure, refrigeration, pasteurization, grain stores, even basic fruit crates, which means that food goes to waste before it even leaves the fields. The next 3 biscuits are the foods that we decide to feed to livestock: the maize, the wheat, and the soya. Unfortunately, our beasts are inefficient animals, and they turn 2/3 of that into feces and heat. So we've lost those 2, and we've only kept this one in meat and dairy products. 2 more we're going to throw away directly into bins. This is what most of us think of when we think of food waste. What ends up in the garbage, what ends up in supermarket bins, what ends up in restaurant bins. We've lost another 2, and we've left ourselves with just 4 biscuits to feed on. That is not a superlatively efficient use of global resources, especially when you think of the billion hungry people that exist already in the world.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Right, so you'll have seen that he presents in a very visual way, using some biscuits that he found in a bin, and he was able to demonstrate very clearly how food is lost. So I think my answer here is, well, resources such as TED Talks are tend to be very graphic, very visual. They demonstrate. They're very well structured talks, and they demonstrate to their audience the points that they're trying to make. And they also often make it very personal to themselves. They usually use PowerPoints like I'm using tonight. So it helps our students to bridge that language gap that they may have to deal with a lot of these issues. So, and obviously there are a lot of resources. I often go to, for example, if I was doing a talk on, if I wanted to do something on food with my students, say about the bees, I might look up websites and look for websites that are directed at young people. So they often present them in very clear ways. And I tend to go to the more official websites. So for example, BBC Wildlife magazine, for example, might have online resources for education, for telling people about insects and wildlife and agriculture and things like that. Where are we up to? Portion of food wasted. Okay, so let's answer. So that's the first question answered, which is, what does it look like in the classroom? How do we get some of this information? How do we introduce some of these themes? Somebody in a webinar I gave this afternoon talked about project work. Mentioned that projects are a great way to get students actively researching for themselves. Excuse me. Presenting information, teaching each other, if you like. So there's a lot of peer teaching going on in classes where project work is happening. Some of you mentioned using TED Talks in your classes, and again, that's a great way of introducing these themes and topics and getting students learning about them. But even with our TED Talks, we need to be critical. I'm aware, for example, that a lot of TED Talks are sales pitches. There are people with products and they want to sell their products, or they want to sell themselves, their own brands. And we have to be very critical even of that very elevated information. Questions I would like to ask Tristram, for example, he's talking about all this food that's wasted. I would like to find out if that food waste is the same in certain countries and other countries. I would imagine that there are a lot of places where food doesn't go to waste because people eat it straight away, and much closer to the agricultural process, and less likely to throw good food away because they're in developing countries. And I'm sure we could think of critical questions to ask and to probe the information that he's giving. Let's think about how we can help our students to be more critical thinkers in the classroom. So the first one I'm going to give you is from another coursebook writer for National Geographic Learning, John Hughes. And John I think you can access it on the webinar site. I'll put a link up for that at the end. You can listen to him talking about critical thinking. This comes directly from his talk. Let me just see if it's working. No. Here we go. So here's an exercise that you could do with your students to introduce this problem of reliability in information. Where are you getting your information from? How reliable is that? Well, you could start the discussion with something as simple as this. Get your students discussing and rating different sources of information. Do they think it's a reliable source or not? An article in a newspaper. A post on Facebook. I would hope that most people would think that a newspaper was a more reliable source of information than a post on Facebook. But then there'll be another question later on in the lesson, which would be, which newspaper? Who is posting on Facebook? Who is posting on YouTube? And I'll give you some ideas about how you can assess and evaluate the reliability in a minute. A post on Facebook. Some people questioning that. Okay. So there's one very simple thing you could do. You could take that straight away into your classroom and get students discussing it and then talking about who they trust. And I think you'll find with teenagers, especially if they spend a lot of time online, like my daughter does, that they're extremely aware of how reliable things aren't. You know, my daughter got it wrong with that vegan meme, but I think she's also very, very sensitive to who is speaking, why they're speaking, and that's in the end, the crux of critical thinking is about asking the question, who is speaking to me? What are they saying? Why are they saying it? Are they trying to sell a product? Are they trying to change my mind or persuade me to do something? And what effects are they using? I need to be aware of the effects that they're using. Are they tugging on my emotions in order to make me feel angry about something, for example? So here we go. Some ideas. Now these come from a friend of mine, Damien Williams. Damien, and there's a link again on the Padlet to his website. So these are ways of evaluating the trustworthiness of sites and sources. So these are tips for you and your students. So he asks us to watch out for odd domain names. So you might find that, for example, maybe abc.com is a news channel, but abc.com.co is some fake news website. I don't think that's true, but that's the idea. There are often these little tweaks. So at a glance, you look at the website and it looks okay, but actually there's an extra letter here or an extra letter there, and you need to be careful. Think about sites, be careful of sites which don't publish their sources or attribute their authors. So if it's a nameless page, there's no references. That's one of the good things about Wikipedia, is that you can follow up the resources at the bottom. They're very rigorous about insisting that if a Wikipedia entry hasn't got good references, that there's a warning about that at the top of the Wikipedia entry. But of course, Wikipedia doesn't always get it right either. You can be suspicious of websites which have very poor design, sites which have very poor style. You might recognize bad English, for example, in a website. Often if a website is written in capital letters, that's a clear sign that something's not right. We're often deceived by images, not just still images, but video images, and now it's possible to manipulate very effectively. And we're all aware of that. We see the funny side of it, but be aware that actually a lot of serious news may well be photoshopped images. And then, of course, there's the sensationalism. A lot of content for social media is produced in order to drag people to their websites. So that clickbait is what the kind of buttons and the websites that you see advertised that you just naturally click on because it's got a beautiful girl on it, or it's sort of the 10 richest men in the world. You know, those things you see at the bottom half of the internet. It's just clickbait. It's just people making money out of people clicking on things. And then there's the sensationalism. Look out for big words and explosive exclamation marks and things like that. They tend to hide half-truths or untruths. Okay, here's a few things you can do. Follow the sources. If you're not sure about something, like I wasn't sure about this broccoli protein issue, I followed the source. I looked up Dr. Furman. I found out that there was a lot of criticism of what he was saying online. I read some of that criticism. I read his defenses of those criticisms. I didn't believe it, and I went with the critics. Often good websites will have About Us at the top, one of the tabs, and it gives you information about the people involved in the writing, the contributors. Are they there? Does it have an About Us? Are the contributors listed? If you then follow up those contributors, you can actually search for the writers themselves, their names. They may well have been reported on certain websites. So there's a lot you can do to find out, to start asking questions about information. Encourage your students to use multiple sources for confirmation. Don't just rely on one piece of information, but look at it from other angles as well and find out other people saying the same thing. It's not always true, because a lot of myths get echoed. The internet is often referred to as the echo chamber because everyone's saying the same thing 1,000 times. But it obviously helps if you don't trust a single person saying something, but find out if lots of people are saying it and they're coming at it from different angles. And then there are these stories that often they make you very angry, and you might find out that you've just been tricked completely. So triple check stories that make you particularly angry about things, because you may well find that they're not true. And there's a couple of websites there that are specifically for this. Snopes is a very famous one. It's been going for many years, and it's won lots of awards. And they do a lot of research into the rumours and the misinformation online, and then they ask the questions. So you say, did Donald Trump, la 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 la, and they will give you the answer. And opensources.co is a way of they classify websites. So they will classify websites as fake, bias, unreliable, etc. Okay, so a couple of places that you can go to. Tree octopus website. Yes, Fabiola, that's a famous one. The myth of the tree octopus, and there's a photoshopped picture of an octopus in a tree. It was designed in order to teach students critical thinking, wasn't it? That's a good one. I think we used that in one of the books, actually. So there we go. There's some ideas from Damien Williams. Finally, I'm going to look at statistics as well. Statistics is something that I never learnt at school in any depth, and I really wish I had, because although it sounds dull, so much of what we rely on is statistical information, and we always equip ourselves better to understand it. Here's a good example. This is from Tyson Seaburn, another teacher, trainer, and speaker at conferences. And this is about how you evaluate statistics. So here we've got two tables which are ostensibly saying the same, giving the same information, which is the most dangerous cities in the US. Somebody's got the tree octopus. Someone was asking about the tree octopus. Adriana has found it. It's a fun one to do with your students. Lies, damned lies, and statistics. Well, this is a good example, Uma. So the one on the left is wrong. You don't. I wouldn't label it as wrong to start with. Find out from your students if they can work it out for themselves. So here we've got the most dangerous cities, and what it gives is the total number of murders. And it says very clearly that Chicago is the most dangerous city in the US, with a lot more murders than any other city. However, that doesn't mean it's the most dangerous city, does it? Because Chicago is a big place. The more accurate way of presenting that information is on the right. The most dangerous cities per capita, per 100,000 people. Now we start to see how dangerous a city is in reality. So when we see that Chicago isn't even in the top 5, Chicago is actually quite a safe city. And Detroit happens to be the most dangerous city according to this statistic. So that's a very clear way of showing two different points of view. One way you could do this is you could give the two graphs to different people, to different students in groups, get them discussing the information, and then get them together in pairs, and they can compare information and say, hold on a minute, no, mine says Chicago is, well, mine says Detroit, well, which one's right? And they start to argue about it, and through that discussion they make realizations about misinformation. So there we go. I realise I've gone over a little bit and we've got very little time left. So that's the end of the talk. Here we've got a couple of links. If you'd like to see this webinar again, or you'd like to recommend webinars like this one and other ones like it to colleagues and friends, then the NGL Cengage webinars link is there. This webinar will be uploaded to that website at some point in the near future. Emily's actually put the link into the chat box there for you to copy and paste. The other one is In Focus, which is a blog that's regularly updated about once a week, or if not more often. I've contributed to it, and a lot of the other writers and National Geographic explorers and things like that. So it's a very exciting blog to read.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. And
thank you ever so much for listening.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
In the chat box. It's been good.
And I'm just going to put you on mute there. I was just echoing a bit. Just a few last minute things to note before you leave us today. First off, we do have a survey and we'd love to hear your feedback to help us improve webinars in the future. At the end of the survey, you will be directed to a free demo code of the Learn English with TED Talks supplemental classroom resource, which helps learners of English understand and discuss powerful ideas from TED Talks. So definitely be sure to check that out. And also, this webinar featured examples from Perspectives, which Dan is a co-author of. So if you'd like more information on that, you can also check out the link right there. It's a 4-level series that teaches learners to think critically and to develop the language skills they need to find their own voice in English. So if you're interested in learning more, definitely just follow that link there. And as I mentioned, Dan is an author of Perspectives. And last but not least, as Dan mentioned, we'd love for you to attend another webinar. We do have one coming up next week on authentic listening with Lewis Lansford. And then we do have our blog there as well. And we'd love for you to connect with us on social and be part of our online community for teachers of English. You'll be receiving the certificate of attendance as well as the slides and the recording of this session in a few days following this webinar, so just stay tuned for that. Should come in about 5 business days. So thank you all for attending. I do see Carolina. I will follow up with you separately about the certificate there. And thank you everyone for attending. I'm going to send you all to the survey now. Okay, thank you, Dan.